So we talked about creating that database or spreadsheet or whatever form it takes, just collecting your raw data. There's obviously then something you need to do with it, right? It's a tool. It's a means to an end. It's a living document that is continuing to be evolve and grow, just not only in records, but in complexity perhaps. And you're going to think of new uses for it. You're going to think of ways to use it to communicate. You're going to group and sort and filter, forward it in different ways. We can see the slides. Yes, thank you. And but also, you can use it to create checklists. You can add priorities. You can a lot of judgment calls. So the institutional priorities is something a bit budgetary considerations, and be able to add in those elements to your decision making as you plan a project.
If I could give you like one thing to take away from this is you don't have to think of everything yourself. There are tons and tons of great resources, some of which are listed already on the Archives at Risk Help Desk resources that are checklists and evaluation criteria and templates for self-assessments. So if you are in a situation where you need to do this, Google is going to be your best friend. The Archives Help Desk is a great place to start, but Googling checklist for collection assessment and put in like your specific kind of collection, you will find some great things that exist already. You don't have to reinvent the wheel, and you can use that as your jumping off point. It will often surface issues you hadn't even thought about, like what is your roof made of? How often do you recharge your fire extinguishers? But it will also provide a context for you to tailor and focus based on your own special needs and sort of add things to the list. Checklists are a great start. Templates and existing resources are a great start, and you can always modify them. So get something that's close to what you need that already exists, and it means that it makes it a lot easier to get a thorough assessment.
So yes, what to think about, what are your particular risk factors? We have heard about the environmental risks related to the condition of existing storage facilities. Those are always something that should be on your mind, and will change. Buildings get older, they start leaking, mechanical systems are never maintained as well as they should be. Things that are unseen are often the first to go in terms of a preventive maintenance program, of budgetary priorities. It's not glamorous, and it's often a slog for the facilities departments to make their cases. They're not always great at communicating needs over the exhibition department or the area that has exposure and that has, where you can attach monetary values. Like, okay, what, if you're a public institution, what your visitor counts are. It's hard to quantify those things, and they're not always thinking in those terms. Engineers are not always thinking in terms of how to state their cases, because it's just assumed that things will be taken care of. Never make that assumption. Also, security challenges will vary considerably depending on whether, again, what's the location, the perimeter look like, the access rules and policies, the staffing levels. If anybody has any specific examples, again, if it's security, you might not want to mention the specific institution, but if there's some examples, we'd love to hear challenges that you may have faced from a security perspective.
Denise had a great question in the chat about fire safety and mitigating risk of damage from fire and smoke. Even if your collections don't actually catch fire, the quality of the air that surrounds them may very much be affected by the quality of the air outside. Can you talk about that?
Certainly, yes. Gosh, especially in California recently, it's maybe not been so much on our minds in previous decades, but it's increasingly a risk factor as we see parts of the state burn in ways and at times that we never expected. The age of and the quality of an environmental system, so a air conditioning system, let's just call it for lay terms, it may have been designed, often they're 10, 15, 20 years old, and it may not have been designed with archives in mind. So an aging system is going to be an increasingly inefficient one. And there may be band-aids attached, no, not literally, but engineers will do what they can to keep systems running. And so much of that is keeping a stable environment. It's very difficult to maintain a stable environment. If you're closer to the water, it's even harder. People in Santa Monica are going to have a much bigger challenge with this compared to people in Riverside, where you don't have those relative humidity swings quite as dramatically throughout the year. But as far as the smoke challenge, it's all about keeping your perimeter closed and your filtration running. If you can ensure that filter changes are done on a schedule and the person doing it knows which filter to use, that's going to be half of the battle right there. So one of the things that I've come across is filters that are missing, are poorly installed, and are old, right? And when you have an old filter, it gets clogged up, it becomes less efficient, and your system is working harder and harder and harder, and your end of life for your systems is going to be that much faster. So what I would do in such a case is get to know your air conditioning system. Understand what kind it is. There's so many different possibilities depending on your particular building, but you want to know where are the air handlers? And maybe it's in a room that you've never gone into. It's probably labeled mechanical. And you want to have an opportunity to talk to the chief engineer. I'd love to learn more. I'd love to see what you do and how those spaces work. What purpose are they? Because it's a lot of room in a building and a lot of people just don't know what's in there. It's a big mysterious box. And you got to take that shroud off and start engaging in conversations. They are complex, they are intimidating, but having some fundamental knowledge will give you the tools to advocate for improving a maintenance program. You might want to say, can you share the filter change schedule? And there's a good chance there is no filter change schedule. If there is, that's great. That's terrific, but it might foster a conversation about making sure that the filters are appropriately maintained and making sure that they're the right kind. If it's been a long time since that was considered. Now with COVID, I think a lot of institutions finally understood what filtration means and the value of it. And everyone's like, oh, we need MERV 13. MERV 13, what's MERV 13? Which was a terrific conversation. But you have to make sure now that we're a couple years on, are we still maintaining those higher standards that were so important in 2020 and 2021?
I'm glad that you mentioned the COVID pandemic, because I think that has shed a lot of light on the question of indoor air quality that has been talked about in the museum, library, and archive community for a really long time. The fact is that high powered, high efficiency HVAC system just may not be in the cards for an institution that's housed in, say, a historic building, as many archives and community-based collections are. You may be forced to deal with storing your materials in a place that is really leaky and has really bad indoor air quality, and you can't do anything about that on the like best practices scale. What I would suggest again is think creatively and come up with low cost, high impact approaches, like an early warning system for a room where you store collection materials in that has a leaky old window. That might look like taking a piece of white printer paper and taping it to the windowsill so that you can tell if there's a wildfire within 100 miles and a lot of ash and particulate matter is starting to come in amongst that LA sky dirt. Write the date that you taped that piece of white paper to the windowsill, and bring a fresh piece of paper over near it and see how much darker that paper on the windowsill is. That can give you a sense of how much particulate matter or smoke or ash might be affecting the indoor air quality in that room over a defined period of time. So you can do some really, really simple things that don't even require technology or tools, but do give you a sense of what might be impacting your collections, especially when it comes to smoke and fire.
Yeah, and another thing about pandemic is we were suddenly in a situation where we wanted as much fresh outdoor air as we possibly could get in a building. Unfortunately, that is the opposite of what you want in a stable indoor archival environment. We want no air changes. We want to clean and condition the air that's inside our space and never introduce outside air. It's not possible to do. That's not a realistic thing. It's the ideal as far as a storage and engineer's perspective, but it's not optimal in terms of a habitability and worker safety and well-being perspective. So there's a balance there. It's not 100% outside air, I can tell you that, because that outside air is way dirtier than almost any interior situation, and it's going to be whatever the ambient temperature and relative humidity is, and then it's going to have to be corrected. Versus most systems, they're going to circulate the indoor air and recondition it, but you only have to change it a few degrees. You don't have to get it from whatever it is outside to whatever it needs to be inside. So it's a bit of a balance, but again, it's a conversation. How much outside air? What are the institutional needs? And make sure that you're optimizing for all functions in those spaces.
And Denise, yeah, you make a great point about this is about personal safety as well. Thinking about people first. Then, as Susie Orman, financial expert, says, people first, then money, then things. Our collections are really the heart of what we do in the archives world, but archivists really have to come first. So putting your priorities in the right order, and the other I think useful catchphrase here is, if you stay ready, you don't have to get ready. So if you think about this in advance and just sort of walk through in your mind, okay, what if the fire is coming close, or what am I going to do if the if we get the order to evacuate, what do we want to remove, where are we going to put it, how are we going to do our best by what is left behind, and again, disaster planning and disaster management is stuff that you don't have to start from scratch. There are great resources and guides, including ones listed on the help desk resources for disaster management, specifically related to fire and smoke damage, and disaster recovery, for which there is some money available from the state. If there is a disaster local to you, you might be able to get financial help for mitigation, but it's always better to be well prepared than to be well funded for disaster recovery.
And to the point of people first, that's the mantra with emergency planning and response, is that you are planning for the people first and giving them, building in the tools into the institution that you have some sort of automatic protection for everything else, because you're going to get people out in certain situations. And the first people who want to get in or hardest people to get out of the building are usually the registrar or the conservator or somebody in collection management. And, having that, again, that dialogue among those people, understanding the priorities, building that into the institutional culture is critical to having a successful plan, because when push comes to shove, they will have to get out. The fire department will not let them in. But if you have resources, planned your space, planned your protection systems, you're ready to deploy plastic for a water emergency, whatever that is, you can work with agencies to make sure that they will do their best. Identify your top and seal it in a lockbox that you're going to take with you at your top assets, and then direct the fire department to those. I'm not sure about all municipalities, but many of them will want to help every institution after life and safety are taken care of with their assets.
The next slide here is feeding into disaster planning and response, which again, we touched on this a little bit already with life safety versus collection safety, and planning for the worst case scenario and hoping for the best case scenario. If you plan for the worst case and then you end up with something better, then you'll still be ready. And the disaster planning and response is a whole separate thing. We could do a full week's workshop on disaster planning and response, so the worst case scenarios, case studies of organizations that have had to respond to really bad stuff, some of which is not natural disasters. There are, I think, everybody here has probably worked with or known somebody who had a broken pipe in their own building. Sometimes the phone call is coming from inside the house. So sometimes being aware of what the native hazards are within your structure, and what could go wrong, a poorly secured shelf, or employees who are not necessarily as safety conscious and are doing things like standing on a shelf to reach a higher shelf, and bring the whole thing coming down. So having a culture of safety helps make everybody more attuned to the risks that are present around you, and better able to sort of build all of your collections storage areas around that minimizing harm and minimizing risk ideal. And as Lisa,
and it's not elimination, it's minimizing and planning, and it really always comes down to water. Earthquake, there's a risk from the earthquake to life and safety. The collection risk is about water. In a fire, you're going to put it out with water. In a flood, obviously we got water. And then in a building, and I meant to put this in the slide deck, but somehow I omitted it. Photographs of the ceilings of a brand new building in the collection management area. And while the goal was to put as much of the plumbing in the common hallway outside of the space, there were inevitable penetrations where, and for all kinds of things, not just sprinkler water, but also for chilled and hot water for the air conditioning systems, sewage removal, because there was a bathroom nearby, and you only have you have to follow physics and gravity to remove sewage. Domestic water for fresh water coming into sinks and bathrooms. Gosh, there's a few more examples. Storm drains. If a stack, you name it, there's a water type for it. So
Yeah, and even just spills, people bringing beverages into, or water bottles into your storage area, and tripping and falling, having a cup of coffee by your computer. There's a reason that one of the guidelines says like no food or drinks in your collections areas, or areas where your materials are. Spills are a disaster, but on a very, very small scale.
Yeah, one of the highlights and earlier in my career was at the Getty Research Institute. We were, let's see, what was happening. I think we were open. Yes, we were open, or close to it. And we had a dry pipe sprinkler system. So what that means is it was charged with air, so that you didn't have water sitting in pipes above your entire everything, because they have to be everywhere by their nature in order to be functional. And unfortunately, it might never have been tested with a transition from the air system to the water system. So what had happened here is we had an outside landscape room where some dust was made, which triggered the smoke detector. And that communicated with the sprinkler system that now bled the air out of the lines and followed it up with water at a very high rate of speed, because it has to be ready to activate should there have been a real event. Unfortunately, one coupling, and a 6-inch coupling, or a coupling on a 6-inch pipe, wasn't all the way screwed down, right? And what happened is we had a separation, and within 5 minutes or 5 to 8 minutes, I think it was, we had 30,000 gallons of water coming out. That's a pretty decent size residential swimming pool throughout the lower level of the Getty Research Institute. It was tremendous. We lost an Andy Goldsworthy piece in the middle of the structure. When Andy was informed, he was delighted. It's like, well, my work is supposed to be deteriorate.
I know, he's probably delighted. Yeah, he's like, you can commission me to come back and do another one, but it's supposed to be ephemeral. Oh my God.
We were lucky. It was in a hallway. That main line was located in a hallway. The branch lines were located in the points where they needed to be. You needed to have the water, but you're put there. It wasn't entirely luck. It was forethought and planning, where you have those main lines not going through the middle of your vault, but through an adjacent hallway, and only the necessary elements, and they are necessary to have a functional building. And they're sometimes a necessary evil to have a functioning institution, that they're going to find their way into your spaces. So it's managing that level of risk and making sure that you have conscious planning for these kinds of systems.
And as Lisa pointed out, I'm just putting the link in the chat here, and I'll include it in our links specifically for this workshop as well. But as Lisa said, the NEDCC, the Northeast Document Conservation Center, is offering, as part of a special program called Ready or Not Cultural Heritage Disaster Preparedness Project, free consultation for California organizations, so free site visits for you to get some professional help and design your disaster plan. So I encourage all of you to look into that program and take advantage of those resources that are available. There's no time like the present. If you have a plan, you can always update it. If you don't have a plan, you'll always feel like you're starting from scratch.
Yeah, and got this example here, it was only 8 minutes, because our security team was all trained in the disaster plan on the location of the shutoff valves in case of an accident. In case of a real thing, they wouldn't touch those shutoff valves, and it would be the fire department that would come and do that. So it's a nuance and important distinction. So with planning projects, and I think Lisa might agree, I hope, planning a rehousing, whether it results in a later relocation, is a long-term proposition. And you might not get the hearing or the attention or the buy-in that you had hoped or expected early on in a you can explain to someone, of course, everyone's going to understand the critical nature of this project, and it's going to be fully funded and staffed immediately. Well, I've yet to encounter such a scenario. But you have to open the window. You have to introduce the idea, and you're going to have to get shut down or ignored, maybe past your tenure at a particular institution. But opening the window and leaving the idea there is like, this is the idea. Here's the tool. Here's the rough budget, what we should be planning on, because it might take another year for the next budget or another year. And I hate to put it this way, and a lot of people don't have the patience or the stamina for such a thing. But the realities of nonprofits, government institutions, private institutions is this might not be the first thing that they want to fund. But when that money is available, that shouldn't be the first time they've heard about it. They need to have heard about it, and the idea and some process details, reports, priorities need to be introduced so that when it's there, you're ready to roll. When Snowden and I were rehearsing this a little bit, I loved your example, or your term, shovel ready, right? When the money showed up, we're ready to go.
And that doesn't mean, mind you, when we say shovel ready, it means that you have answers. When people are finally ready to hear you, and you've been saying, like, we need to rehouse our collection, we need to move our collection. When people say, okay, yeah, we need to do that. So yeah, how much is that going to cost? You need to have those answers. You need to not be like, oh, taken by surprise. You need to say it's going to cost $178,000. Here's what, here's the proposal. Here's how we know how much that's going to cost. And here's how much time it's going to take. And here's what extra staff resources we're going to need. And because, if you say how much it's going to cost, they can either say yes, or they can say no, oh, that's never going to happen. In which case, as Andrew says, you bring it back up again the next time they ask, or they say, well, we can't do it all the way. And you remember what we've been telling you all day today, which is that you don't have to do it all at once. So you can say, well, $178,000 gets us all of this, but if we just want to do the most urgent stuff, that's this chunk, and we can break these things out. So really be ready to talk about how, when, and why, and really don't be afraid to talk dollars and cents. Don't be afraid of doing the math and running the numbers, because those numbers are really, really important for you to get to yes. If every time when you finally get their attention, you are coming back with, I don't know, then you're not ready to do that project. So be ready. Even if it might not be right now, being ready and keeping that stuff simmering on the back burner is a really good way to luck is preparedness meets opportunity, right? Just as much as disaster is bad luck meets opportunity. So yeah, and thinking about it, making a business case. So yes, this is going to cost us $178,000, but right now, we know we are losing at least 8 or 9, reels of film every year to climate control related decay, or we can spend $30,000 on new housing for all of our paper materials, and increase their lifespan by 150 years. So making that, if you do this, what do you get for it? Cost benefit analysis is really important as well. And being able to express that in numbers and dollars and cents. I know we don't love numbers. We like to tell a story and talk about qualitative impact, but quantitative impact is really important if you can speak to that.
Yeah, and if it allows you to be operating more efficiently, investing in, if you can demonstrate that investing in rehousing or some conservation or tagging system or whatever level you're ready to do is going to be a labor savings, that is an easy way to quantify. You take your if you can calculate that doing A now is going to result in less staff time, less storage space, I don't know quite what that is going to be for you, then it's easy to go from A to B and build it out over time. I love to do this in, you know, in other examples. We can talk about them when shortly, of adjacencies, for example. Like if you put this function here and it's difficult to get to and we use it frequently, we can calculate how much time for each of these movements it's going to cost an institution versus doing it the right way. So might not be the easy way for somebody to plan, especially for spaces and functions that are not you know, getting people through a door necessarily. But if it then translates, you know, a dollar saved is a dollar earned is sometimes really not clear to public institutions like museums and libraries and archives, because they count the, it's hard to measure the negative, right? They count the how many people are walking in, what the gate admission is, whatever that is. But on the other side, we're in a position to make huge impacts on the budget by wise planning, decision making, and forethought. So balancing those two is always going to be a challenge, and emphasizing that, again, a dollar earned on one side is equal. There's no difference than a dollar saved on the invisible side of archives and collections and storage.
And Lisa points out in the chat that these metrics and these numbers are also incredibly useful when it comes to applying for grants or making appeals for outside sources of funding. I think that that's an incredibly good point. Like, you have to be able to, you know, no, you'll never be able to get a grant that's just like, yeah, here's $15,000, just do whatever. You always have to have a budget for it, and it has to be a justified budget that's very detailed in many cases. I also love the example of wish lists, or just being able to put a price on something that's tactile and concrete for even fundraising at the individual level, to say, like, look, if you give us $7.88, we can buy, you know, one of these extra large cardboard boxes that we need to store these really cool items in, or, you know, we can buy some pool noodles to roll up our panoramic photos on. Having a wish list like that, and that's something where, like, the ordinary person can really feel part of your collection. If you have a wish list and you say, you know, we need like 500 of these boxes to rehouse our collection, and if you give us $10, we'll print out a special little note that says, like, this box was put into our collection by a generous contribution from Andrew Werner. Like, that's pretty cool, right? People do respond to that. There are also projects like the Northeast Historic Film, which is a regional archive in Bucksport, Maine, and also they're a moving image archive, and they're also a working first-run movie theater. And in their theater lobby, next to the candy counter, they have these lucite boxes and pictures of and frame grabs from films that are interesting and appealing, that they want to raise money to do preservation work on. And they have like the little thermometer thing where it's like, well, we need, $850 to do a high quality scan of this material at this outside facility because we can't do it in house. So if you drop your change from when you buy your Milk Duds into this box, that's going to get us a little further down the road. And when this film is preserved, we're going to show it before the main attraction in the movie theater that night. So the community gets to be involved in that. So thinking about what you want and need, and making that an interesting way for people to get motivated to click that donate now button, connect your wish list and your wants to your fundraising ideas. And again, knowing exactly how much it costs and putting a price on things can be scary when you think about the sum total of how much it costs, but it might make your needs much more approachable for people who are in a position to give according to their abilities. And it might make them feel really, really good to be contributing something that's concrete.
Okay, storage and housing, and how it relates to all kinds of other areas of operation. It's going to make everyone's lives so much easier. So there's so many other departments and allies that can participate in this discussion. Access, for me, access, why have a collection if it's not accessible and it doesn't have longevity? So the people who are inviting viewers, inviting the public, scholars, whoever that is, into the discussion of storage and housing. I just like it's valuable to have an ally and collaborator in the engineering and the facilities department. It's likewise true of the reading room supervisor or the person in charge of outreach, right? These are all related to mission. Yeah, regarding cataloging, I think some of that is a little more obvious. The value and synergies there. Documentation. What did we? Where did we? How's that?
Oh,
how do you see that as different from cataloging?
Yeah, taking pictures of things that are on the shelves and documenting the state of the collections. If you have a chaotic collection, it is much harder to document what's there, what might be missing, what might be damaged, than if you have a nicely organized collection. Like it's not just aesthetically pleasing to have a well-organized, tidy, adequately housed collection. It's also, critical for keeping track of that collection, documenting and tracking where things are, where they're going, and how they're doing. Storage and housing is really critical for that. Okay. And then accessioning and ownership, I mentioned that strictly because at places like that have a deposit relationships with contributors to their collections. When I worked for the Academy Film Archive, the stuff that we owned went in the really nice cans, and the stuff that was coming from depositors and needed to be rehoused when it came in went into the slightly less nice cans, because we knew they might be going out again. But the stuff that you own, you always will make a bigger investment in than the stuff that you're just borrowing.
Yeah, I was going to say, Denise asked a question regarding cataloging programs. That is not my forte for sure. Obviously, I like things that can cross-communicate, has accessibility for as many users as possible, allows you to leverage your catalog and data for other purposes. But as far as a specific recommendation, I don't have one for you. Deaccessioning plan. Wow, deaccessioning. Yeah. I think a lot of that is determined by your governing institutions. Deaccessioning is probably something about, particularly regarding research libraries, has specific rules. There's certainly rules and guidelines that are necessary for museum collections in terms of its controversial subject. And institutions have different reasons, often very legitimate, worthwhile reasons, but it can be a public relations challenge and issue if it's deaccessioning art. Deaccessioning books is not so bad, and as long as it's policy. Well, I'm talking about like your standard public library book. I'm not talking about archives and research collections.
But, Andrew, every time libraries try to weed, we get so much pushback. Like God forbid any public librarian should put like the soggiest, most defaced, most battered, least checked out book in the dumpster. Somebody will come along and be like, they're throwing out all of these amazing books. Somebody would want these. Every time.
That happened to us. That happened to us. They were annual reports by the American Library Association. Annual reports of ALA, and we do not need them, but they looked good because they were hard bound. But yeah, it does. It is optics. So we definitely had to think about the optics as well.
If you're,
Everybody does. Yeah.
I have been involved in a reading program at a private library, and that looks like a real library. It has like book pockets with the cards and like call numbers on the spines and everything. And one of the first things I did when I proposed that plan was how are we going to deal with the optics? And I drafted a little note that we can put into the pocket, to replace the checkout card of every one of those deaccessioned books that says, why are we getting rid of this book? And it has Ranganathan's 5 Laws of Library Science on one side that says every book its reader, every reader their book, a library is a growing organism. And then it talks on the other side about how every library does this. We know that this has not been one person's decision. It's not about censorship. It's about a multifaceted assessment of every book in the library and making room for books that our readers are going to read, and allowing these other books that are not being read to find their readers out in the world someplace else. But we put a lot of thought into that because we knew we were going to be deaccessioning at least 1,000 books and probably more. And so we wanted to make sure that, we could say it was not one person's decision. This was a committee decision. Every book was evaluated according to well-established criteria. It's not whimsical, but we had to get out in front of that because there have been so many public relations nightmares from libraries just trying to do what they normally do. Right.
And it's as difficult as it is, it's existential, right? You said every library is a living organism. Well, it also, every living organism sloughs off the waste, the detritus, the dead skin, whatever that is, and it has to be done. And it's existential for survival, for health of the organization, for whether it's a budgetary, a space decision, or just managing that. It's important. And yeah, you could probably do a whole nother. We could do if we can do a week on emergency planning. We could do, at least a day on, or maybe more on deaccessioning.
I think it's a question that doesn't come up often enough when people say we're running out of space. The answer is the reflex is we need more space. Maybe the answer is we need less stuff. It's not a fun conversation to have, especially when you have materials that are, especially if you're a community-based organization, and anything that you give up came from your community, or represents some community or member, or maybe special in some way to your constituency. Focusing, narrowing in, and making pragmatic decisions about the storage and housing of your collection, what you're going to keep and what you're going to not keep, are very, very deep questions that every institution has to address at some point, or just keep building bigger and bigger buildings.
Can I hark back to like one of our first Saving L.A. community history workshops of essential documents? And I put it in the chat, but I can't tell you how important collection development policy is, because you say what you collect and you say what you do not collect. And if there's anything in your collection that falls in under that do not collect, which includes duplicates, things of bad condition, that then is a doctrine you can fall on into, and it doesn't look like an opinion. It doesn't look like you're not planning. And it looks like it also is, most collection development policies go through a review, right?
Yes.
Yeah, it can never be arbitrary. It has to have the strength of institutional policy behind it.
Yes, and a collection development policy should include guidelines and at least an indication of how you will get rid of stuff if you get rid of stuff. The expectation for a lot of places is that if I give it to you, you're going to keep it forever. And it's like, well, if you don't want it anymore, why would I want it forever? Making clear that the organization has to make decisions that are best for the organization, and that includes examining everything holistically. Really, really important. So yeah, I consider guidelines for deaccessioning and setting expectations for what deaccessioning looks like in your institution is an essential document. And it's really where the rubber meets the road when it comes to storage, housing, and its relationship to accessioning and to ownership.